So people have a lot of misconceptions around energy, and it's I guess I pay extra attention to it because my background is electrical engineering. So I'm kind of aware of some of the inefficiencies. But basically, energy is not fully fungible. If you produce energy somewhere, you can't just teleport it costlessly to somewhere else. And if you transport it too far, it kind of takes up more energy than it took to produce it. So for example, electricity, you can only transport it, several hundred miles or kilometers before eventually the cost of transporting it are too much. And so energy, and also the grid has to constantly balance. So there's fluctuating demand throughout the day and throughout the seasons, and there's fluctuating supply. And that delta has to be either used in some way or it's wasted. So there's literally, orders of magnitude more than the size of the Bitcoin network's energy usage is wasted by grids and by other things every day. For example, the World Bank found that natural gas flaring. So when you drill oil, you get oil out, and if you get a little bit of gas with it, it's not enough gas to build a pipeline or to take the gas. It's just not economic if you're only getting a little bit. So what do? They just burn it. They just light good energy on fire.
And creates pollution as well.
Yeah, it creates pollution. And there's nothing else they can do with it. Now, what Bitcoin miners can do is that if you put Bitcoin miners on site, you can run that natural gas through, a generator and power the Bitcoin miners and at least pay yourself a couple cents a kilowatt for that spare energy. And running it through that converts the methane to carbon dioxide more efficiently than burning it. And so it's actually less greenhouse impactful, and you make money from it. And yet World Bank shows that the amount of natural gas flared worldwide per year in terms of energy wasted is something like 8 times the size of Bitcoin's energy consumption.
Wow.
Just that. But then there's also, there's unused hydro. There's tons of unused hydroelectricity that they just, they build this gigantic hydro dam, and it takes time for people to move to that area, or maybe people are not moving to that area. It's just unused power. When China built out a lot of their hydro, that was happening. It happens in Canada. It happens in parts of like northern Norway, for example. There's just unused hydro. And what Bitcoin does, Bitcoin is, unlike a data center, Bitcoin can deal with low bandwidth and low uptime. It can go out to remote regions and just be wherever the energy is. So it's got that kind of flexible aspect to it. And electricity is by far the biggest cost of Bitcoin mining. There's obviously a little bit of hardware costs, there's a little bit of personnel costs, but by far the biggest piece is electricity. So they can go into any region and say, look, we just want your lowest electricity price. And we'll, if you need this to shut off for 2 hours a day, or you need to shut off whenever there's a demand spike or a supply cut, like we'll be the first to cut off because we have the flexibility to do that as long as we price in the lowest electricity when it's available. And so basically what it does is it fills in all the little nooks and crannies and inefficiencies in the system. And, in one given cycle, maybe too many Bitcoin miners go to some place and people complain, oh, look, all these Bitcoin miners. But those, if they stay in a place where there's not energy abundance, then it hurts their cost and they are less competitive than their peers. And so Bitcoin miners will disperse, and they have been dispersing to all the little pockets around where there's unused power. My favorite example is Gridless. There's a company in Gridless, in Africa called Gridless, and especially in like the East African region, they go out to like untapped river hydro, and they build, little mini hydro dams on little rivers, river hydro, and they mine Bitcoin with it. And in developing countries, there's been a chicken and the egg problem with energy infrastructure. It's really costly to build new power generation and transmission. And, the people there need it, but it's like, how are you going to basically prove that you can put this much cost in and recoup your cost? And yet the people in the area can't develop without electricity. So you have a chicken and egg problem. How do you get started? So one of the ways to do it is you can build a new hydro dam and you can mine Bitcoin with it. That's like your anchor tenant. That's like your guaranteed initial tenant. Even if there's no other paying customers, Bitcoin is a paying customer as long as your electricity is cheap enough. And there's nothing cheaper than stranded energy. So they can build a hydro dam, they can mine Bitcoin with it. And as people in the surrounding area tap into that electricity, they can start to outprice the Bitcoin miners, and they can start to take a larger share of that. and that's what we're seeing. And so you have towns in Africa that were not electrified, that because of a Bitcoin mining new hydro setup, that town now has electricity. And that's a real thing that's happening on the ground.
It's so genius.
Yeah.
It's so genius. That's what, again, it's one of the things that I didn't even think about it. And then you were mentioning that, and we're talking about this with friends, and afterwards, it's unbelievable. It's literally just chasing for to be wasted or wasted energy, and completing that balance, actually.
Yeah, and it's been remarkable seeing it. So, for example, in 2020, Stone Ridge produced a investor newsletter written by Ross Stevens, their CEO. And he talked about how he sees Bitcoin mining revolutionizing energy over time. And he specifically said African hydro would be like the best place for it. He's like, imagine, rivers in Africa that are all this untapped energy being tapped and basically creating electricity for these people. And at the time, that wasn't really happening yet. And yet, 2-3 years later, Gridless is doing it and increasing their scale of doing it. And there's other companies doing it as well. Another thing he mentioned back then was people right now, people settle around rivers and coasts and basically along transportation networks, and we bring the energy to us. That's how we've always done it. We go out and get the oil, we bring it to us. We go out and get any power source, we bring it to us. Whereas what Bitcoin mining allows you to do is go to where the energy source is, especially things like remote work. If it entices people to move to this river, move to this region, move to this geothermal area, and during the gold rush in the United States, you'd have people find gold, and then a town would sprout up. Someone has to. All those people that are mining, they need haircuts, they need restaurants, they need they need all these services. And the same thing can happen with Bitcoin mining. You have these like little pockets build up, and people can gravitate toward where there's naturally occurring energy that this can make use of it. And someone has to service the people running it, and someone has to service those people, and you have a little micro town build up and access power. I think basically Bitcoin just fills in all the inefficiencies, and it just takes several cycles to get there. And every time Bitcoin crashes in price and it squeezes out all the miners that have too expensive electricity, over time, only stranded energy makes sense economically.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And actually, yeah, just as you mentioned at the beginning, people were just very negative about it, and the headlines were filled with, it consumes just as much as the Netherlands, or like so on and so forth. Yeah. And now you have the opposite. You even have now, I think, just recently, Alex retweeted something about the World Economic Forum literally shilling Bitcoin mining and how efficient it is. And
yeah, it's funny how that works. And I think the next big thing is heat recovery. So Bitcoin mining, it uses electricity and it converts that electricity to heat. Mm-hmm. That's basically what it does. And we do that for home heaters, for example. We pay for that. Bitcoin mining, the heat is often a negative thing. You don't know what to do with the heat. Now, if you can use the heat for a purpose, in I think it was the Netherlands, they were actually heating
I know the company
flowers.
The company that takes the energy out of the heating.
Yeah.
Because it blows it over. I think it started actually with data centers, which would create a lot of heat, and it would take that heat and convert it into energy and back into the mining. Yeah. But you could do also the opposite. You could then heat homes. Just like then, if you have your own mining.
Yeah, there's a hot tub place in New York that heats their hot tubs with Bitcoin miners. There's some of those African ones I mentioned. Like they'll dry tea leaves because you have to dry them pretty quickly. They'll dry them with the heat generated by Bitcoin miners. Marathon is now they're one of the biggest miners in the world. They're now pretty seriously looking into heat recovery. So over time, not only does Bitcoin mining fall into the stranded energy parts, but then also in order to be the most competitive, and it's a very competitive field, you have to eventually figure out a way to use your heat as another revenue stream, drying something, heating something. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that. I mean, there's a company in France that's, competing with heat pumps for heating homes with Bitcoin miners. And that's powerful. And it's funny because I was talking to one of the people from the company, and he's like, it costs, there's more energy spent on heating French homes than the Bitcoin network. So people think of Bitcoin network as a big thing, but it's actually still small in the grand scheme of things. And it can just all these little energy efficiencies, it can just slip in there and find ways to make use of wasted energy.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Leave your actions down below in the comment section. And if you want to watch more videos, feel free to check the most recent video, but also any other video that we've had published on the channel before. See you next time.